So essentially, we are paying federal workers for a glorified vacation because they're not working from home. One VA employee who was in charge of some of these hotlines, he actually was on a Zoom call from his bathtub and actually took a picture of himself in the bathtub and bragged that this is where I'm going to spend the next hour while I'm teleworking.
So I just got back last week from the inauguration celebrations in Washington, D.C., and what a time it was. The big surprise for those who don't know is that 2 days before the inauguration, or 3 days before on Friday, everybody got notice that the inauguration, as it was meant to be, everybody had been jockeying for tickets and planning. The inauguration itself was going to be moved inside. Outside, it would be canceled. They said it was because of the weather. The parade was going to change routes as well. So all these watch parties, everything that was set up for the inauguration was put on hold over the weekend. Of course, I go out flying Friday night through Saturday night for the Jewish Sabbath, for Shabbat. Had to wait to see what was going to happen. Saturday night, everything seemed to be organized. So the big inauguration was actually done in the rotunda just for members of Congress and a few guests. There was a spillover room in the visitor center in the Capitol, which is a bigger room, which was for governors and the spouses of the members of Congress and some more. And then there were just watch parties all over. But after the big win, everybody knows the big work begins. And the president came out the gate with over 200 executive orders and really just trying to set the tone for the country. Really was a big statement that the president made on the first day, not just in the way he did it, with media sitting around him, asking him questions, just an open back and forth, a dialogue we have not seen from the Oval Office in over 4 years, but also just in the policy. And the Republicans really have an opportunity, a huge opportunity and a huge responsibility with this big win, this mandate that was brought to us by President Trump in November. The Republicans in Congress up on Capitol Hill need to deliver. And historically, they have to deliver in these first 2 years before the midterm elections. And they have to deliver in a big way. They have to make sure things don't get stuck in the Washington swamp. President Trump had a little bit of that in his first term. And really, he's trying to make an effort this time, it's clear, to make sure now he can say, hey, I know how the system works now. Let's make these changes happen. Now, with us today, I was lucky enough to have been invited by Senator Joni Ernst, the junior senator from Iowa.
Good evening. I'm Joni Ernst. As a mother, a soldier, and a newly elected senator from the great state of Iowa, I am proud to speak with you tonight.
Who is a powerhouse. She's the chair of the DOGE committee, the Department of Government Efficiency.
Our adversaries look at us and they see weakness. Our friends are wondering, where is American leadership?
She's on Homeland Security. She's on agriculture. She's on armed services. And anybody who knows her knows how powerful she is, how she gets things done. And she is very strong, and she knows really how to move things in Washington. She's also has been the head liaison advocate for hostages, U.S. hostages all over the world.
We stand here united across party lines and across countries for one cause, and that cause is to bring our hostages home.
And I was lucky enough to deal with her with some American-Israeli hostages in Gaza, with their families, bringing them to her office many months ago. The conversation we had with her was robust and substantive, talking really specifically about the inauguration itself, what the feeling was in Capitol Hill on exactly what we're mentioning here, which is about how we can get things done, how we can push this agenda forward and not let things get stuck. Spoke a lot about immigration and the new immigration policy under President Trump and how we're going to see that unfold, and when will Americans actually feel that on the streets? When will they feel safer? When will we see the border closed? We talk about messaging and the importance of messaging from the White House and what impact it actually has beyond media, but actually with policy. Now, we talked about DOGE and what proposals she has to reduce government spending. She's been working on it for over 10 years. I told you she's a powerhouse. And of course, we speak about foreign policy, the wars, how we're going to proceed with the war in Israel, Ukraine, etc. So I know you're going to all enjoy this. All of you who like policy, like to understand how things happen in government. This is a great conversation to pay attention to. Thanks, Joni Ernst, for joining us today. This is Standpoint, and I'm Gabe Groisman. Senator Joni Ernst, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Gabe. Thank you.
And first, just to start, I want to thank your staff for arranging this beautiful studio here in the Senate building. It's an honor to be recording here on this incredible weekend.
Yeah, it's so fantastic. So again, thanks for taking the time and for being here in Washington, D.C. and talking about some of these really important topics.
So let's just start. I'm here in D.C. I've got my two older daughters with me, 18 and 15 years old. They came for the inauguration. The energy in D.C. has been electric. I think around the whole country, there's this real feeling of turning a new page. It's morning in America again. The inauguration itself, though, for those of us who are not members of Congress, we were ended up on the outside in these watch parties. It was great. We're not here to be there. We're here to just be part of history. But just tell us a little bit, what was the mood like in the Capitol Rotunda for the actual inauguration, the actual swearing in?
Gabe, it was fantastic and a really historic moment because, as you mentioned, it was held in the Capitol Rotunda, and that hasn't happened since the inauguration of Ronald Reagan 40 years ago. So the president did move the activities indoor, the ceremony indoors, which was unfortunate. We had a lot of Iowans that had traveled out to Washington, D.C. for the ceremony. They wanted to be part of that. But the weather really was not good. We didn't want folks exposed to the elements outside. And the mood was just really exciting because, and the president spoke to this will be the golden age. I think the beginning of that golden age. And President Trump really has set the stage for so many exciting opportunities, whether it is things like securing our southern border, which is really important to the safety of Americans, all the way to activities like the Department of Government Efficiency, which is something that is very important to me personally as well. So the mood was good. It was light. We felt that this was an exciting opportunity, not just for members of Congress, but for all of our constituencies.
Yeah, it was really something to see. And by the way, just on the weather, from Iowa, I don't really feel bad for your constituents.
It was not
the weather wasn't so bad for them. My family and I from Miami, I'm cold here sitting in the Senate building. Look, a lot went on the first night. I mean, President Trump, in perfect President Trump or typical President Trump fashion, he didn't just go to the balls. He then went to the Oval Office and had signing ceremonies, an open press session already, which we hadn't seen in 4 years at all from President Biden. Over 200 executive orders, or approximately 200 executive orders signed. What do you think the message that the president was trying to set on being so busy here on day one? What do you think he's trying to tell the American people?
Well, the old expression, there's a new sheriff in town.
Right.
That's exactly what he was doing.
Yeah. What concerns me, I feel like every time there's a new president, and I'm as excited as everybody for President Trump, big agenda, a lot of excitement, a lot of energy, and then they run into the brick wall that is the swamp of Washington, D.C., the difficulties, the complexities of getting things passed. Not everything can be through executive order.
Right.
We know every president keeps pushing the executive orders a little bit. They may get pushed back by courts, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the laws are passed by the legislature. How is this Congress going to be different? How do you see, what are the roadblocks that you'll see there that Trump will have to get over? What are your thoughts?
Well, I do think that President Trump has a very, very aggressive agenda. And I appreciate that so much. And I look forward to working a number of those issues in Congress. And many of us do, because we finally do have the opportunity. We've got a very, very slim majority in the House. We have a slim-ish majority in the Senate. But the advantage that I see with this 4 years, at least the initial 2 years of this Congress, with the majorities we have in both bodies of Congress, is that the Democrats in the minority have seen the results of this past November's election. And they see that their constituents in their home states are demanding a change. So whether that is border security, whether that's federal spending, whatever the case may be, the Democrats are a little more inclined to be supportive of our efforts because they saw the mandate that came down with the 2024 election. So I think we have a little bit of an edge there. But again, it's only in this first Congress. So we have 2 years in order to really establish the goals and then get over the finish line. So we'll be pushing very hard right away. And that's exactly what President Trump is doing. He's pushing very hard day one.
Yeah, my favorite executive order out of many, but one that I know you've spoken about, is getting federal workers back in the building. And we know that these buildings are going to be working full-time, 24 hours a day to try to even just keep up with that agenda. To your point, though, of the Democrats maybe seeing a shift from them a little bit, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised, though, by the vote approving the nomination of Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, one of my senators from Florida, 99-0. He was maybe the perfect candidate for the Secretary of State, and anyone opposing that really would have looked silly. In the House, I'm sure he would have had some oppositions. I think in the House, we're going to have a lot harder of a time. But let's dig in a little bit to some of the issues you raised, because I know we're short on time. So DOGE, right? Government efficiency. Now, I'm so happy to be speaking to you because many people don't know you're the chair of the Senate's DOGE caucus. It's a different acronym, but your DOGE is delivering outstanding government efficiency. And you came out the gate real quick, and you came out with a $2 trillion package, if I understand.
Yes, that's correct.
Of federal cuts. Can you tell us about that?
That's correct. So years ago, literally a decade ago, when I first came into the United States Senate, I had a mandate from the people in Iowa to make them squeal here in Washington, D.C. Those that are feeding at the trough, the real porkers is what we would call it.
Oh, I saw this.
So my initial advertisement for my campaign was called Make 'em Squeal. And I was going to come to D.C., cut spending, ferret out the waste, basically. And so every month I have had a Squeal Award, which is somewhere where there's waste, fraud, or abuse in the federal government. And then I come up with ways to counter that. What is legislation? What's a way that we can correct this type of behavior in the federal government? And so I have a decade's worth of work that I have done on what is now being called government efficiency. I have all of that, and I was able to present that to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy right after the election. Sat down with them, went through my plans, provided them a blueprint on how they could cut $2 trillion in our federal government spending. So right out the gate, we've been able to provide them with a number of issues and focus areas. One that we've already mentioned, getting federal workers back into the offices, ways to save money there. So they have that blueprint. These are things that we can act on, both through executive order as well as legislation and regulation. So I'm really glad to have had this posture over the past decade and finally have somebody now that's willing to help us with these efforts.
Yeah, to get some wind behind it, because as a conservative, we always talk about cutting government spending, making government smaller, only as big as it needs to be.
Right.
Yet the government keeps growing.
Right.
If you can just give us a little glimpse below the surface there, and what category of do we see the most waste in the federal government?
Well, right now, one of the biggest areas of waste is the telework and the abuse of the telework. So when we talk about government efficiency, we want those workers to actually provide a service to our taxpayers. So I'll use the VA as an example. They have very few people that show up every single day to work. Most of their workers are teleworking. And yet we have an ever-increasing backlog of VA disability claims. We have VA hotlines where calls go unanswered. Our taxpayers expect that their calls will be returned, and they're not, because we have so many people that are working off-site. Well, we need to get them back online. So essentially, we are paying federal workers for a glorified vacation because they're not working from home. One VA employee who was in charge of some of these hotlines, he actually was on a Zoom call from his bathtub and actually took a picture of himself in the bathtub and bragged that this is where I'm going to spend the next hour while I'm teleworking. Well, you're not actually working if you're taking a long hot soak in a bubble bath. So we really need to be more efficient. And I know that workers, when they show up at work and they have someone supervising them, they'll actually be working for our taxpayers. So again, let's stop paying the salaries of people who are actually not working. Let's get them back to work. So that's an area. Paying for the buildings that are not occupied around not just D.C., but across the nation. It costs us billions and billions and billions of dollars every single year for unused space. Even during COVID, when the buildings weren't occupied, people were forking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in new furniture that wasn't going to be used. So we really do need to focus on that. I think that's incredibly important. But there are so many other areas of waste that we can drill down on.
What's incredible, you have you really had a head start on this in a way where there was an idea of how to do this, and you got to say, hey, I've been doing this for a while. Let me show you where you can start.
We have, and we've done this even through grants that go through the National Institute of Health and other, the National Science Foundation, other programs that claim to have some sort of benefit for the American people, but they are doing the experimentation like shrimp on a treadmill. I'm sorry. I don't see the benefit to the American taxpayer on knowing how fast a shrimp can run.
Yeah.
So we've got to stop this nonsense, and that will save, again, billions of dollars. Those billions of dollars adds up to trillions of dollars. And that's exactly what we have provided to Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. There's so many other ways we can get at regulation, which will help us lower our costs as a nation through deregulation, but also to our taxpayers as well.
Make sure you include on the list, in the center of downtown Miami, a full square block, an abandoned federal courthouse that you can't even step into. You can sell it tomorrow.
Let's get rid of it.
Probably $500 million within a few weeks.
Absolutely.
If the government would ever move on it.
Absolutely.
Look, my family comes from Argentina. Lived there for about 130
Absolutely.
years. The president there, Milei, has been making a big splash all over the world. He was able to cut spending 30% since he's been federal spending there, 30% since he's been in office. It's obviously a different system. He has a lot more authority to make cuts. Do we think we're going to be able here with the whole, there's such a wind behind the backs of these conservative movements, including government efficiency. Are we going to be able to see Congress actually cut government in the next couple of years?
I do hope so. And again, the American people really spoke quite clearly, quite loudly in the last election cycle. They really want President Trump to lead this effort to downsize our federal government, return that power to the people, down to local governments, back to our states. We feel very strongly in that. If it's not spelled out in the Constitution for our federal government, then we need to return that power back where it belongs, in the states, with our cities and our counties, our local municipalities. So
as a former mayor, I appreciate that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, let's not be, going where we shouldn't be going. Yeah. And so, yes, I do believe that we can do this, and I do believe the members of Congress have heard that as well. We are going to face resistance. I mean, we always will. But what I want people to recognize and really grab a hold of is the thought of government efficiency and DOGE, in that this is not a passing fancy. This is not just the latest shiny, bright object. It is something that we care about. And there are a number of us that have worked very hard on these issues for the past decade. We are going to continue working in this direction. So again, it's not a flash in the pan. It is something that we need to be very serious about. As we look at our overwhelming debt that is burdening our taxpayers now in this nation, we have to be serious about not just making a tiny little cut here and there, but doing a deep dive into our federal budget. Close up that deficit spending. Let's balance the budget. And then we need to figure out how we are going to tackle in the long term our overwhelming debt to the American taxpayer.
Yeah, and the last point, which is a political point, which is in this last election, the Republicans, we were able to bring over lots of new voters in lots of different sectors. The only way to keep them is to deliver on the promises that the president made and that the party has made, and this is the opportunity to do it. Right. The other real important, there's so many important executive orders that were passed, but lots of them had to do, several of them had to do with the immigration,
yes.
Stopping the illegal immigration, closing the border. The question I have for you is, given all these efforts, How long do you think it's going to take till the American people, the regular American people all over the country, start feeling the impacts, the positive impacts of these efforts?
Well, I think immediately out the gate, I think part of it is the messaging too. Never underestimate the power of a message and what that signals to everybody on the interior of the United States by simply saying we are going to shut down the border. We're going to make sure that immigration is legal. That sends a very positive message to people across the United States that have lived in communities that have been overrun by encampments of illegal migrants. They see their taxpayer dollars going to support those that have not contributed into the system. They see opportunities being squeezed out for their children at local schools because now there are accommodations made for those that are here illegally. So all of this will be tackled through executive order. Again, we'll have to follow up with our own legislation. We'll have to take a look at the regulations. But we will be working together with the Trump administration to make sure that we are righting this ship. That America is still a place for immigrants to come to, but through the legal channels. We want them to be productive members of our society, so that's great, but it has to be done in a way that benefits the American people, benefits our country. So again, the power of that message, President Trump saying, I hear you, I'm paying attention to you, and I am going to execute the orders necessary to ensure that your family is safe and that your taxpayer dollars are protected. And I think immediately, day one, people are going to be thankful for that. Now, in practicality, when do they actually start seeing it in their communities? It will take a little bit of time to see that impact. But as you see, there's deportation efforts underway for those that have committed crimes. I think, again, that's important because we know as you see ICE or other enforcement agencies out there really apprehending those that are violent criminals, those that are bringing fentanyl into the country, I think that's going to make our community safer. And you will start feeling that through lower deaths from fentanyl, lower incidents of sex trafficking of minors by the cartels. You will start to see that. But those impacts, it'll take just a little bit of time.
Yeah, and the messaging, I agree with everything you said, and the messaging is also being heard. It's resonating all over the world, right? This is now a new day in America and back to sort of law and order, and I think it's critical for, if I may say, for members of Congress and people in the public sphere to get the message out, because we know the mainstream media is going to do their best to turn this into some sort of racial thing or some sort of negative thing when the message is so clear. We're getting criminals out. They're starting with people who crossed illegally but also committed crimes here, right? Who could be really for that? But it's the messaging is super important. I just wanted to transition. The first time we met was after just a few weeks after October 7th, 2023. I was in your office. I led the first delegation of survivors from October 7th and some family members of people being held hostage in Gaza. By the way, some of those that came to your office, their family members were released in the first hostage deal a few months after that. First of all, I just want to say thank you, because not just of your kindness. I remember saying to you, this is why we come to you with that Iowa Nice. Everyone says Iowa Nice. There was the warmth in your office for people coming into those difficult moments is important. But it's so much more than that. Many people don't know that you've led the efforts in the Senate to represent and advocate for the hostage families ever since October 7th, and you haven't stopped. So my first question is, this last week we saw the signing of this deal. 33 of the hostages, if we get to the end of it, will be released in exchange for over 1,000 terrorists who are held prisoner. There's been a lot of misreporting about it where they said they were initially going to be released to Gaza or outside of Israel. It's not true. At the end, they were released into neighborhoods in Jerusalem and all over Israel. My family has a home in Jerusalem. There's 12 of the terrorists are probably within a 10-minute walk from where our home is, where they were released. So, it's not a perfect deal at all, but we did see this week 3 hostages released. God willing, next week we'll see 3 more. Now, what are your feelings on the deal?
I am okay with the deal. I think it's good that we see our hostages coming home. I know that there are greater implications. That's okay, and we can deal with those. But the important thing to remember is that the men and women that were taken by Hamas, backed by Iran, they have been held for 470 some plus days, and they must come home. They must come home. Now, the broader part of that with whether they're Palestinians or terrorists or, those that are being released in exchange for these hostages, we will need to keep an eye on them. We will need to understand what their motives might be in the future. But we can deal with that. That's another day. We will deal with that. It is important to bring a ceasefire and make sure that we get the hostages home. So beyond this, the goal is being met. Get them home to their families. Their loved ones have suffered enough. The hostages have suffered enough. So I did go into Israel on October 10th. I was in the region to speak in Israel on October 8th. And, of course, then October 7th slowed us down a bit. I still was able to get into Israel with a bipartisan, bicameral delegation that I was leading, and met with American families whose loved ones had been taken or killed by Hamas. And it was tragic to look those families in the eye and understand the depths of their pain, their confusion, their fear. It was awful. But as America, we have to push back on these terrorists. We can't let them win the day. We can't let them get away with murdering Americans and our friends, the Israelis. So it became a mission from October 7th forward to make sure that we were representing our American families and pushing back against Hamas, and to the broader scope, all terrorists that are being backed by Iran, and ultimately pushing back against Iran as well. So I've made 4 trips into Israel and neighboring countries to work on hostage negotiations. I hope to return very shortly to continue pushing for either the continued opportunity for release of hostages, to continue pushing back against Hamas, for greater stability in the region. We still have a lot to work on with the Abraham Accords. This was something that sidelined some of those activities, and we're not going to let Hamas win. We're not going to let Iran win. So with the agreement, yes, I am okay with this agreement. We had 8 Americans that were taken or held hostage by Hamas, and we have one set of remains that came home. That was Hersh Goldberg Poland, who was assassinated by Hamas in recent months. We have 7 others that are held hostage. We do believe that a few have unfortunately been killed or are deceased, most of those from October 7th. But I believe we have 3 that remain alive, and if we can get them home, I will be filled with joy for their families.
Yeah, so my final question on that, the numbers they're exactly right. There's 3 American hostages. The intelligence says there's 3 that are alive, 4 that their remains are still there, which is also critically important to get them back. A total of 65 still hostages still in Gaza. I mean, including if we take out the 33 that are to be released in this deal. What can the United States do now in the new Trump administration beyond what they've done? Obviously, the administration is the key reason why this deal got done and when it got done. But now moving forward beyond this deal, what would you like to see from the U.S. administration, from Trump, to be more aggressive in getting back at least those American hostages?
Well, full-on pressure against Iran. It is absolutely necessary that we are sanctioning Iran, any actor associated with Iran, so any of their terrorist proxies. And we need to make sure that we follow through on those sanctions. Iran is the number 1 funder of all of these terrorist proxies. And whether it's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, whether it is Hamas, whether it is Hezbollah, we know the funding is coming from Iran. It has to stop. The Houthis, another example of a terrorist organization that is disrupting the stability in the Middle East, designating them as a foreign terrorist organization. There are so many steps that we can take to make sure the world knows that the United States stands with Israel. We will not be separated. There will be no daylight between Israel and the United States. If someone is coming after Israel, they need to know that the United States is standing by and ready to assist. So the messaging, again, it's so powerful that the world needs to know and understand. If you are not a friend to Israel, you will have a more difficult time with the United States. So let's get the hostages home. If you're not returning them, then we are going to come after you. These are our citizens. Just full on pressure in so many different ways that not only the primary sanctions, but secondary sanctions, whatever it takes. But we need to be loud and clear. And that's where I feel the previous administration, they weren't loud and clear. We would have had a hostage deal much sooner if the Biden administration had said, you know what, enough's enough. We're coming after you. That wasn't ever said, not clearly. So now we have the force of the administration.
Even the evidence supports that. Obviously, when after Sinwar, first of all, things from his office were captured, and the intelligence community has reported that there's documents in there saying that we should keep pushing because we're seeing daylight between the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We're gaining ground with the United States. They're pressuring Israel. So, anyways, I thank you for everything. I thank you for everything you've done and you're continuing to do. I ask when it comes to pressure on Iran not to forget Qatar and Turkey and their role
absolutely.
here. These are days where
Yes.
we have to see the world with clear eyes and
Yes.
not allow these countries that play both sides to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, thank you so much. I know you've got a lot of work to do. I
Thank
appreciate you for joining our podcast.
Absolutely. And thank you, Gabe. And thanks for allowing the platform and to be able to get our message out there. It's critically important. So thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.